Hello and welcome to the Big C Church podcast, where we have challenging conversations to better the body. I'm your host, Dr. Angie Ward. My guest today is my friend Terry Ishee. Terry is the executive director of Forge America. He's been with Forge for over 10 years, but now he's executive director. So as part of that broadly, he's just kind of cultivating missional leaders around the country and abroad. And as part of that, he is also host of the Forge America podcast, co-host with Alan Bradford of the Forge America podcast, which I think is where we first got connected, Terry. So
that's correct.
And I told you this before we hit record, but Terry, you are my very first recording for the Big C Church podcast. You may not be my first release. We'll figure all that out later.
Yeah, you want to tuck me way mid-season when...
Right, exactly. Yeah. But I am just delighted that you're the first person, and I picked you as my first person because I thought, one, you're a professional, you're a podcasting professional.
Not at all.
Yeah. But so you understand how this works from the other side of things, but also as a friend, and in the short time we've known each other, you've just become a deeply valued friend and brother to me. And I feel like I'm safe with you if something goes wrong on this. And I feel like we can always just talk forever. And so most of the time we're either on Zoom or this type of thing, or we're at a conference and we have just a little time to kind of grab dinner and catch up. So This time it's us just talking, but with record hit. So thank you, Terry.
Oh my gosh, I'm honored, and I feel the same. You have just, I think the world of you, and I love your writing, your thought leadership, and again, just your friendship over the last couple of years. I mean, you are our most repeat podcast guest on the Forge America Missional podcast. You're one away, Angie, from being a 5-time.
I know. I'm like
guest,
the Alec Baldwin and Steve Martin of Saturday Night
That's right.
Live. I know. I'm waiting for my shirt or whatever a special honor I'm going to get.
Yeah, we'll get you a nice little smoking jacket.
And, smoking jacket. Yeah. That's what I need. A smoking jacket. Yeah. That's right. So Terry, I said when we were communicating about this, I want to talk with you about the idea of loaded terms, or like how we a lot of times discover that we're using the same words with people that we're talking with about church and ministry and leadership, but we're really coming at it from different dictionaries.
That's right.
And the impact that comes. And I first got introduced to this when I was in my PhD program. And by the way, you know this. I introduced myself as your host, Dr. Angie Ward, but you know we're Angie and Terry, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Just making
sure.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So in my doctoral program, I learned about it in research, how there's words you have assumptions about, but in like my dissertation, I had to, that may mean something different to the person who's reading or who's not familiar with that term. And so that's where I first became aware of it. And then I started seeing, I'm seeing this at play a lot of places, in ministry and in conversation, even with family marrying into a Southern family, and me coming from the Midwest. Like, we just understood things differently. So where did you first, do you have any recollection of how this first became an awareness for you?
Yeah, it's funny. There are a couple of different spots that I've experienced that sort of thing. One inside the church and one outside the church.
Okay.
Outside the church, it happened super young. I remember when I was in middle school, about to go to high school, and I grew up in inner city Houston, and spent tons of time. Did lots of athletics and enjoyed that. And then when I got sent out to the country, I remember showing up for football practice, and they would use this language. They would say certain things, and I'm like, okay, I know that word, but the way that you say that word does not make sense, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the first time I got where people say things and use words that have these different meanings, and I'm like, okay, I'm lost. I'm not 100% sure what you mean when you use that word in this context. So that was my first, because it's a contextualization problem, right? It's context. It's using the word in a context. So people, cultures, all changed the context of a word. But I didn't really, I was a stupid kid. I didn't even really think about it. It's like, well, this is football.
I'm just the outsider, whatever. Yeah.
That's right. And then when I became a pastor, all of a sudden I was like, oh, language matters. Like language matters. And I remember my wife, we were just having this conversation the other day. We were doing a grant proposal, and we were looking at, she's a English, she's an English genius. So she got her degree in literature and all of these sorts of things. And so she was doing the proofing, and she came across a word, and she's like, this word, you're using it as a verb, and this word's not a verb. And I'm like, well, in our world, it's a verb because we say it all the time, right? It's like, no. And she's like, that's so weird. And she was like, yeah, you always say like low hanging fruit. In education, we don't say that. Like, no one talks about low hanging fruit. Like, what do you mean when you say low hanging fruit?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know. It's low hanging fruit. It's like just easy to grab, And,
Yeah.
and so it just reminds me, even from like, we live in the same household, but she's in an education world. I'm in a ministry world, and these terms just seem to kind of pass us. And so I am fascinated when I'm in the church world, and it could be, sometimes it's denominations, but sometimes it's just age, different generations, and someone will say something, and there are some words that are maybe words that someone's trying to recapture. Maybe it's in kind of an older word, ancient word, and it's like, oh, that's dated. But then sometimes you just throw a word like mission.
Yeah.
And now it's like, whoa, when you say mission, what do you mean? Because when I say mission, I mean this.
Yeah.
And it is nuts. It is really, really, it can be confusing. It can be disorienting. And unfortunately, if you don't take the time to contextualize and really kind of dig into it, it can be harmful. It can really hurt people and put some people in some bad spaces when you don't do the work of understanding each other's culture and language as you talk about some of these terms.
Yeah. Let's put a pin in that as far that piece that you said about how it can be harmful, and let's talk later about some like examples of that. But you brought such a great point about like your wife said, low hanging fruit, and you're like, I don't know, it's just like some of these are so natural to us or deeply rooted that we're just like, well, duh. I mean, to everybody else, we're just like, of course it means this. And so we have like this deeply held emotional or even theological, like, so it's one thing to say, well, we just come at different dictionaries, but then to go like, but mine's the real one. Mine's the right one, or the Jesus one, and
that's right.
And so I think that can be so powerful. And so like my first example, one of my first that I heard in ministry was, well, not in ministry, not first time in ministry. One of the first I remember was I was a student at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is a whole nother story maybe we'll talk about some other time.
That's right.
But I was saying something about how my family and I were seeking to live missionally. That's the one you just talked about, right? And of course, this is your world, missional. And they immediately went, oh, me too. And they meant missionary, evangelism, converting. And I was like, and then they're like, well, my family was a missionary for this many years. And I was like, yeah, but I'm the people I was talking, like if you and I talk missional, we mean one thing and we have an understanding of that, but you talk about it with other people. And for me, because of that, missional makes me go, and we've talked about it a little bit. It makes me kind of have this, not a check in my spirit, but like, what do you mean by that? Because
that's right.
Sometimes in my church experience and in evangelicalism, missional has been conquering for Jesus. Not, well, let me tell me when you say missional, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. Are you asking me?
Yeah,
literally
I'm asking you.
Me? Yeah. So for me, missional is living a sent lifestyle. So it's the idea that in my everyday being, living, breathing, walking, part of it's an identity thing for me. It's part of who I am. I am an image bearer of God, created in his image, but I'm also a sent one of that creator of Jesus and the Spirit. So when I live my life, I live with purpose. I live with a sent purpose. And that purpose is not about recruiting. It's not about converting. It's about illuminating, revealing the rule and reign of God, the kingdom of God, helping people see the king and see the kingdom.
Yeah.
And I can do that with my words. I can do that with my actions. Depending on the level of relationship, I can illuminate them to, hey, I'm doing this because of this. Or it could just be like, man, that Terry's a really good guy, right? But again, I want the kingdom and the king, the fragrant flourishing of what that looks and smells like to be evident. And so that's the purpose in which I live. So I am a sent one to do that on behalf of King Jesus and the kingdom come.
Yeah. Yeah. Fragrant flourishing is not what I had come to over, many years in the church to when I think of missional. It's what I said, it's that we're going to other lands. It's we're conquering for Jews, we're winning souls, where it's exclusively about conversion. And it was also kind of a position of power or accomplishment. And even combine that with my leadership training experience, in education, where it's like the mission driven organization, and you have a mission and you have to accomplish, and it's almost like a military, conquest kind of thing. So just you and I as friends and brother and sister in Christ, like, have came from completely different understandings. And even though now my head goes, yes, that fragrant flourishing kingdom, that kind of thing. When I hear the word, I still go, and have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my background, my educational background and all of that, my wheelhouse is organizational leadership.
Yeah.
So mission in the context of organizational leadership is very different from mission in regard to the Missio Dei or missional.
Yeah.
And so even in that world, and because I spend a lot of time helping people wrestle with organizational mission, and my sweet spot is helping organizations find alignment in their organizational mission, what they do, who we are and what we do, and finding that alignment with the mission of God. So how can you have those two missions, mission and mission in alignment? Yeah. So really, what do we do? How do we align with what God is already doing? What is God up to in restoring and putting all things back to the way that he intends for them to be?
Yeah.
And for me, one of the things that has been super helpful, because at a younger age, when I gave my life to Jesus when I was 15, and at 17, I felt a response to a calling into ministry, Baptist background, all of that. And mission was that very thing. Mission was for the elite, Christian SEALs who were going to go overseas, and they were going to do something big. They were going to be the next Hudson Taylor, or the next, the next Lottie Moon or whoever. And it was reserved for special people, and you get to hear them speak twice a year because they come on
at the
furlough.
Missions conference.
That's right. They'll be up, and they'll come, and Sunday night we have special guests and all of that. And it was like, wow, God must really, really have put a blessing on them. And so it was, and again, a lot of it was like they were off to faraway places, and it was a little bit of, it was the follow up. So much of the original missional work was rooted in colonialism.
Yeah.
It was like you said, to use the word conquering. It was like, we're going to go conquer. And just like even studying the history of missionary work in Hawaii is such a heartbreaking read. Because so much of it was, we just want you to adapt and do the things that we do. Yeah. And it's funny, you go to Hawaii and you will find homes built in Hawaii that are just ripped right out of colonial Massachusetts.
I bet. Wow.
It's just so weird.
Wow.
And it's like, how did that get here? And it's because those missionaries said, well, this is the right way. Our way is the right way.
Yeah. And
I'm just so thankful to be influenced and mentored from afar by, individuals like Leslie Newbegin, and more than anyone, Michael Frost, but even beyond Mike, because so much of Michael's work is rooted in the work of David Bosch.
Yes.
Who's a South African missiologist who was living during apartheid, very colonial kind of expression of life. So he was so familiar with this idea of colonialism, and his work is really a masterpiece of pulling apart the idea of mission as recruitment conversion to more, no. All God's up to is letting people see how wonderful he is.
Yeah.
That the mission that we get to participate in is just letting people see how awesome God is.
Yeah.
But it's lost in translation. And
Yeah.
so we say these words, it's loaded, people have their assumptions, and they don't, if it's not checked, if there's not conversation and relationship, which I think is the key, because that's what's missing.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, sure, missional. Yeah, I'm all about that. And then they go do their thing, and we're two ships passing in the night.
Yeah, or even going different directions sometimes.
Different directions, 100%.
Well, so what are some, let's just kind of throw out, what are some other loaded terms that you've become aware of? I mean, missional is big, obviously, because that's what you do. That's in your title, in your name. You said one when we were just, you talked about, you said you answered a call, that you received a call to ministry. And I would say the same thing. When I was a college student, I felt called to ministry, and you and I both know what that meant. I think we mean vocational.
That's right.
Ministry. But I think that's a loaded term that we probably, we in ministry, I'm doing air quotes, world, we're thinking that like that's professional ministry, but really we're like, people, well, I'm not in ministry. It's like, well, really we all should be, so that's one of them. Like, are there others that you can think of off the top of your head?
Yeah, even beyond the call to ministry, I think you could go a little more vague and just calling in general.
Yeah.
And that's something, my first 12 years of ministry, vocational ministry, was steeped in next generation adolescent kind of ministry. And just the conversations around, I got to figure out God's calling in my life.
Yeah.
What's God's unique calling for me?
Yeah.
And just talk about a box full of kittens. I mean, you're all over the place. You just, to try to sort what you're thinking and feeling and how do you process and all of that. And so that calling is one that always, even to this day, I find that one coming back quite a bit. It's like, I got to find my calling. And I've got a 17-year-old going off to college next year. And so that's something that trying to work through and just reminding her that, God's calling is it's very general and, God is good. As long as you're in alignment with him, you can really go do what you want. That's the beauty of freedom.
Yeah.
Right? And
I'm thinking there's a couple I harp on my doctoral students at Denver Seminary and their thesis. They talk about, I said, biblical is one. So whose translation, whose version, whose understanding? Because we have, at last count, 40,000 plus denominations around the world, all based on their understanding of biblical.
Yeah, Bible based. Yeah, no, that's good.
Like biblical worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Biblical gospel is another one that I think has become, there's understandings. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things in the last, it feels like that word has kind of, not that it's gone underground, but it had a hot moment, right? Everything was gospel this and gospel centered and all of that, probably 10, 15 years ago. And I remember, I am a seminary dropout, but I just remember I was like, I've been in ministry for 15 years and they keep saying this gospel thing. And I don't know what you mean by this anymore.
Yeah.
Because it was so used in so many different directions. And I remember that was the one where like, I just remember feeling really embarrassed. I was like, okay, I've got to go study this word. Because people are using it for so many different things. I'm like, gospel. Yeah. Okay. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay. The story, it's got, And then it was because it is that might be the most loaded word, even more than mission or missional for me.
Yeah.
That's the one that I've seen. I mean, people pack in a lot of baggage with that word.
Yeah.
And that one for sure is a kind of hotbed word for certain denominations or, theological leanings,
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's like, when I hear One of my brothers from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary used gospel, or the Gospel Coalition. That's a different understanding,
Yeah.
than I've heard from others. And I'm trying to think. Let's see, Christian can be another one. I mean,
Christian. Yeah.
it's like, well, this is I don't know, just as an adjective for something, it means something. And for some people, it's a total turnoff, and other people go, oh, this means I need to do business with this person,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another loaded word, and I'll give you two, and they're really related. And they're cringe words for me. That to the point where it's like every time someone says it, I instantly
cringe
go
words.
into,
It's a great way to describe it. Like you just go,
yeah. Ew. And it's one of those things where I feel like I have to ask for forgiveness on the back end, because I often, without asking permission, I go straight into like soapbox, on it. And it's the two words.
Yeah.
That's right. The two words are community and fellowship.
Oh, tell me more about those. Yeah.
Well, it's just, people love using community. It's like, oh, community this. Oh, we got to build community, be a community. And I think we've just watered the term down so much. It's like, okay, what is the purpose of community? And fellowship's the same way. Fellowship, it can be reduced to, we just share a meal together.
Yeah,
right.
When you say fellowship, I picture fellowship hall.
That's right.
The church I grew up at, and I picture really good food, a pitch-in or a potluck kind of thing. I mean, it's fun and great, but I don't think it's to what the Bible talks about, koinonia.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even like the idea of community, fellowship, koinonia, it should speak, when we study it, it speaks more to a diatribe of this rubbing of two individuals rubbing together. It's the iron sharpens iron. It is, there's purpose, right? And so Alan Hirsch uses the word communitas, right? So Alan loves these anthropological words, and he ushers them in from an anthropological world into a theological world, and then that's another podcast. Is
right,
made up words, right? So not loaded words, made up words.
We have a podcast on Alan's made up
language. That's right.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of shared purpose, relationship, community, and so. But you just hear people all the time, and they get so excited, and they galvanize and rally people around community, and I'm like, but. Does that just mean we're going to meet on Wednesday nights for, mediocre appetizers and, a mediocre Bible study?
Or Sunday mornings, just we're parallel spectating.
That's right. Yeah. We share a pew together, or we share a row together.
Yeah.
Or we shared 15 words while you got your coffee and I got my coffee in the lobby, and then we go in. And so, but it's like, well, we're a church built on community. I was like, well, really? What do you mean by that? And so again, it's the watered down it's words, language being watered down to mean something that's not quite maybe what it should mean, or maybe what other people, because I've heard people who have a great definition of community, and they'll speak with community, and they'll talk about it. And at first I'm like, oh gosh, another, community. I've heard it. I'm bored already. Right. But then they'll like unpack it, and I'm like, okay, if that's what you mean by community, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. Yeah. Right? And so.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, sometimes things are so loaded, or they become, to some people they're loaded, and to others they're empty or devoid, or they're just kind of watered down. And so you have one person like you who's going, that, like, don't mess with that word. Like that means something big to me. And,
that's right.
I'm trying, others to like,
I've got another one.
Yeah. Go.
And this one, hey, you got to make fun of yourself. You got to pick on yourself. And so I'm in the missional incarnational world, pioneering, church planting, all that.
I mean, you're the cool guy. You've got, like, those of you who are listening, you got the cool beard. So
not at all.
Yeah.
No, you're 10 times cooler than me, Angie. And so, except that you root for the Denver Nuggets, which, oh my gosh, that's just, sorry. No.
Listeners, by the way, I have a questionnaire for people who are on the show, and anything else you'd like me to know. And Terry's thing was this very, very holy, very deep. The Houston Rockets are still ahead of you in championships.
That's right. We have 2. You have your first. Welcome to the club.
Thank you.
Yes. And thanks. But you got to poke fun of yourself. You got to be willing to take one on the chin. And I think one of the most loaded words that are being tossed around now is the idea of church
Yes.
what is church and
Yes.
micro church. And
I did not pay for this placement, by the way,
I
people who are
know.
watching and listening, but this is what this whole podcast, I mean, and what our
Yes,
conversations are about, right? A lot of times.
that's right.
Yeah.
We talk about, church. And I want to be flexible when I think about ecclesia. And so I want to be generous when we talk about what church is and what church could be. But I can admit and confess that I have brothers and sisters in my end of the pool who are maybe a little too generous, a little too flexible in saying this counts as church. Because I do, we talk about, one of the terms we'll throw around is, there's an ecclesial minimum.
Right.
If you have these things, then thumbs up, you can be church. And again, I want to be generous and I want to be helpful, but I mean, if everything is church, then nothing is church.
Yeah.
And so there has to be something. So that's one of those that I think, and that's the one, at the end of the day, community, mission, all of those words, we can get into an alley and fight it out, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Church is the word, though, that we have to be there. There's actually something to be lost in that word.
Yeah.
I can lose missional. Because I can explain what I mean about that kind of lifestyle and be able to we don't have to use that word anymore. Same thing with community, fellowship, all of that. But if we lose the word church, if we lose that word, it makes it insanely different. And I've seen people try to lose it. Oh, well, it's a community, a faith community, or a community of believers, and all of those sorts of things. But I mean, church is it's one of the foundational words in our language.
Yeah.
We have to really make sure that, and I don't want to get combative or fight for it. That's not my posture, but it is something that's like, okay, guys, let's make sure that we don't let's not water it down so much that it means nothing.
Yeah. I think we need to fight kind of together for
That's
it.
Right.
What about gospel or Christian? I mean, you said church, you could lose missional. What about
that's a good, I think I've been one of the ones who's thrown off the word gospel.
Yeah.
To the point where I hear it, I almost can we find another word?
So,
because I do a lot of organizational training and working.
Well, but it is a loaded term, right? So we have to.
It's a very loaded term.
Means to people.
Christian.
People say, "Well, I'm a Jesus follower."
I'm a Jesus follower,
I say, people say, gospel. I say, well, I'm a person of the good news. I'm not sure. I haven't landed either. I go, what do you mean?
Yeah. And again, it's one of those words where language, and I am not articulate at all. That's not. I'm not really. Michael Frost, I read some of his work and I'm just like, how in the world can a human being
be brilliant? Yeah, brilliant.
Write and talk in that manner. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I truly believe Mike must have had AI before everyone else did. And he's just some computer AI. Is spitting it. He is the AI. That's right.
Behind everything.
That's right. And so it's amazing that some people can speak and talk and just the way you grasp language. I'm not that. My wife makes fun of me. I'm from Texas. I don't have a strong Texas accent, but I grew up in inner city Houston. So which is a melting pot. And I say certain words that my wife's like, you sound like you're from New York. On, I say on instead of on. And it's like on, we're online. And she's like, what? And then
I'm from the Midwest. That's no normal. Online, everything's harsh.
Yeah. And then I can't, to me, pen and pen that,
right.
I pin, I'll pin it in and write a pin.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Pen and pen. And so I'm not an articulate guy. So language to me, I don't lose sleep over language.
Yeah.
But, there are things that we have to be mindful of how we talk and speak about things. And not just in pronunciation, but in meaning and substance.
Yeah.
Because if we just take language for granted, then it gives space for, I can't believe I'm talking about this. It gives space for, bad theology, and you give room for people to create space around things that maybe aren't winsome for the kingdom.
Yeah.
It's not moving us forward in what God wants, and it can be really, really damaging. And that's where I think language can be harmful.
Yeah. So let's come back to that pin we put in about, like, do you have some examples of that?
Well, I do, and I apologize.
That you're able to share without.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, I apologize, because the example that I almost feel like I have to get it out, and we can cut this and then get to something else. But I'm watching the Way Down miniseries,
the Gwen
documentary
Shamblin.
docuseries, the Gwen Shamblin, and she started the Way Down and the Remnant Fellowship and all of that, and just watching that, and we just finished this last night, and I'm the way that, like, what differentiates a church from a cult and theology, and then how you interact, and because language, as powerful it is to paint a picture of the kingdom and king, language is equally powerful in holding people submissive and entangling them in really unhealthy, harmful environments where where abuse can kind of exist and be roughshod all over, and it's just really painful. And so you can see language in both ways, and that's where I just like, oh, thank God I'm not one of those. No one's gonna accuse me of being a cult leader, because I can't speak long enough without, it's like, oh, this guy's a moron. Okay, we're good. Yeah, we'll move on. Yeah. But language is dangerous, and so
powerful,
the way you use words,
powerful, and because of its power, it can be dangerous.
That's right. It can be dangerous.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Language is powerful. I like that. I mean, I think it is. I can't remember who said it, but the pen is mightier than the word, and
the sword. Yeah.
Yeah, the sword. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And it is this idea that the written word, the recorded word, which now, because of podcasts and video and all these things, are what we just say off the cuff sometimes, can be cemented as the written word, and people take these things and you can twist them and use them, and that's where when I think there are a lot of people who are victims of the Bible being used as a weapon.
Yeah.
And because, again, language is powerful. The written word is powerful. And when in the wrong hands with the wrong motives, it can really do damage.
Yeah. And I think it's partly like our interpretations of the language and of the words and of the Bible, all of that has power. I was thinking some other ones in our culture today, for sure. Well, evangelical. I work at an evangelical seminary, and so people, we're a couple colleagues and we're reading a book right now about evangelicalism and going, are you evangelical? Well, what do you mean by that? Woke, liberal,
that's
conservative.
A good one right now.
So right now, and in our climate, these are loaded terms, and they are automatic. They're shibboleths, which is in the Old Testament. Those, if you're listening, don't know what it is. It's like this word that was used as kind of either you're in or you're out, or it, or it's almost like a secret code word kind of thing. And so, I mean, I think gospel can sometimes be that. I think inerrancy, can be that. But like, it becomes this thing of. I was talking to one of our fundraising people at Denver Seminary, and he said people sometimes call, are you going liberal or are you woke? And he's like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
So it's so easy to just hear a word and, like you said, cringe words, or we automatically shut down because of how they've been used in the past. Sometimes it's, we have to distance ourselves and go, okay, wait, what, put some space until we know what they mean by that. But other times I feel like we're also too quick to just cut down. Well, you use that word, you're out.
That's right.
So what are some things you do or that we can be doing to help recognize the power of language, recognize our use of language, be more charitable and generous in our conversations, even when people use words that make us cringe or look, you have that gulp moment? Like, what do you What works for you? Or how are you growing in
Yes.
that practice?
So the first thing you do is you delete Twitter and Facebook. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. First thing you do is unfriend all the people who disagree with you.
That's
What you
right.
do.
That's it. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
That's very gospel centered.
That's very
Yeah.
gospel centered. Yeah.
Let's use all of them in a
It's
sentence.
Christ-like.
Let's use all the trigger words in one sentence to end this.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I do think there is something about social media because, people love to turn a phrase. And so someone will say something. I remember when progressive was the big word, like, oh, we're so progressive, or relevant. That was a big
relevant.
one.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in a meeting. It was a pastor's network meeting, and someone stood up and said, and this was back in the day of Brian McLaren, and so this is a while back. And I remember someone saying, if you ever hear the word progressive, you need to run. Yeah. And I was just like, why? Like, what's wrong with that word? And it's just like, because someone had their feeling about it and all that. And so, I do think there is something about the social media piece. I think you have to, I am a big, big proponent of, at least in my life, how I live as a practitioner in this. I'm not going to engage in a public social media platform around arguing words or thoughts or philosophies and all of that.
Yeah.
That I really, really believe we have to figure out. And this is the challenge in a world where, well, what happens if I disagree with someone who lives 1,000 miles away? And I'm like, do I need to have a translocal? I need to be right. And just like, let it be.
Yeah.
But I really do believe relationships, like these are the things that need to be discovered in the context of relationship. And that's the thing that grieves me about the church. It feels like we're losing the relationship piece of being the body of God.
Yeah.
When you start to hear people talk about, I'm part of a church, I go to a church, I'm actively a member of a church, and I feel lonely.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody.
Yeah.
That's heartbreaking. And I think it's because we've created places and systems and environments where we can participate, but you don't have to engage at a real relational level.
Yeah.
And because we lose that, we're quick to have our trigger words. Like, and I think we all have it, right? We all have a bank of words that we find are cringy, that we find are triggering for us. And so for some people, that word bank looks like, well, if you say the word woke or you say liberal, I'm going to have a visceral response to that.
Yeah. And
so I think one of the things that we have to do is, one, we have to train ourselves to, like, it's not a bad word. It's, and the vice versa. I don't know what the opposite of woke is, but without being insulting, but like, if liberal triggers you, then you probably have no problem with conservative, or vice versa. But it's like, how do we like learn to not have that visceral response?
Yeah.
It's only in relationship. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like, who am I speaking with who has a differing view of me, or who has a different interpretation of a word? And we can sit down. And so, like, one of my favorite relationships that I have which is you got to meet Jacob Hoyer a couple months ago. And so I love Jacob. Jacob is a Lutheran tradition. And when we talk about baptism, I love it. It's some of my favorite conversations. And we have different views. Like, he's like, let's baptize that baby. And I come from more of a Baptist tradition where it's like, no, we want, it's like, let's make sure that they've made a decision, and this is a representation of their choice in choosing Jesus and all of that, and submersion and all of that. And so, but it's funny, we have this beautiful relationship.
Yeah.
And he's one of my dearest friends. I love him to death.
Yeah.
And we can have very differing beliefs, and we can come down on how we see it very differently. But at the end of the day, he draws me a little bit closer to him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if you're a parent and you want your baby to get wet, it's like, well, we can we can do emergency swim, and we do a quick full submersion, whatever, because I'm a full submersion guy.
That's
Like,
right.
little baby, he's like, to survive, Now, I don't know if Jacob's coming a little bit closer to my way, but it's one of those things where it's like in relationship,
Yeah.
you can see the other person,
Yeah.
and it's not, but I've seen people have that conversation. I had a neighbor who was a staunch Presbyterian, very reformed. And when he found out I was a pastor, he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have a pastor who lives across the street from me. And we started building a relationship. And I was at his house one day, and I was looking at his bookshelf, and he had Doctrine by Mark Driscoll. And I'm like, oh, okay. I think, yeah. And so then I start unpacking, and it's like, oh, he's like hardcore Acts 29 reformed and all of that. But when he found out that I was not that, he changed, and it was weird. And it put a damper in that piece. And it's because he was choosing his words, his definitions, his interpretations. He was putting that over relationship. And that grieved me.
Yeah.
It grieved me. And that's where I think these things become, where words and definitions can become dangerous. It's our theology can become poisonous for people.
And can become more important than the relationship, I think.
That's right.
You're saying. Yeah. Well, and I see, like, when we lived in denominational times, you knew your tribe. It wasn't necessarily tribalism, but you kind of knew you had kind of a shared language and a shared lifestyle. But now, everybody in our country, at least, is moving more, you like any given church, even if it has a denominational label, but certainly if it's non-denom, has a mix of people. So I think it's natural for us to want to find, how do I know who to trust? Well, language is an easy, very insufficient and sometimes incorrect, but way to sort.
Yeah. Well, and we haven't got into this, the whole sexual ethic conversation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of words that are loaded when it comes to that, especially like, how is this church? What, you look it up, and really people are looking for websites. They're looking for words.
Yes.
I need to see this word on your website.
Yes.
So, and again, and I'm not getting into one way or the other, but we see that a lot in the language. And it's one of those things where it's like, hey, I'm looking for, if I'm shopping for a church, I'm looking for a set of words.
For sure. Yeah.
Some of them are more social words. Some of them are theological words.
Yeah.
Some of them are cultural, and it's one of those things where, as a pastor or as a church planter, you have to be mindful. And it's heartbreaking because, I think 20, 25 years ago, you could get away with, well, just don't have anything. Like, if you're unclear, then you're safe. Yeah. But now we're moving more and more into where clarity matters so much that to be unclear on a stance or what you believe or what you say can actually do more damage than if you were just to come right out and say, hey, here's where we have conviction on this. True. Or whether it's, sexual ethic, theological ethic, whatever, it's, we all have what we believe and how we, operate based on that. But lots of words and websites. I mean, it's fun just to go look at church websites and
for
just
sure
read
you can
and
tell
see
so
how they,
much
just how they are phrasing things and talking about things. And it's, I'm sure there's a service out there that, it's like, hey, we help your church website, navigate the language. I'm sure there's copywriters out there who are experts at this kind of thing. But
I've talked with people who they'll move to another town. And so I have a friend who moved to actually overseas to England for her husband's work assignment for several years. And she said, I don't know how to find a church because the Church of England is the idea that there's a national church, and there's these other churches, and now everybody's changed their names of their churches. So they don't have First Presbyterian and, Third Reformed. And so you don't have you just look for the Methodist Church. And so they're all named generic, just kind of Christianese terms. And so I just helped her over. We were actually on WhatsApp texting each other, messaging each other. And, I was like, well, so she said, well, I'm looking at these 3 or 4. We visited these places. And I said, okay, well, this place, and just looking at their website without stepping foot, or traveling over across the pond, I could tell her, well, this generally usually means this, but so here's something you might want to ask about. I didn't say don't go there, but, it's like, yeah, we make these immediate judgments. And I think for me, the thing is two things, like, what do you mean by that? But also, what do I mean by that? Why is it cringing to me? Or why am I so strong on why we have to use this word or be so clear about this definition? And when I'm more clear about it, it's less loaded for me because I've taken it out and kind of looked at it a little bit, then I can have the same conversation with you and go, okay, well, what does that mean to you? And get beyond just that gut level emotional reaction.
Yeah.
And then go, okay, what, like you said on Facebook or social media, I won't say just fight the terms. Sometimes I'll just raise the question. What does that mean to you? Or I may have a different meaning, and to be okay with that sometimes.
Yeah. I'm curious, Angie, what are your thoughts and feelings on the idea of, different tribes, denominations, networks, communities, movements having, building their own language? What are your thoughts? Do you see it as something that is helpful, or, is it just a reality that
I think it's an organizational reality. So we haven't really talked much about our organizational leadership sides of us because we get so caught up in eating Portillo's in Chicago and talking about how wonderful that is. But my doctorate was actually on organizational culture of churches, and like the idea of artifacts, language, and websites, all that, and what deeper values they speak to. But I think it's just a natural, like your family, I'm sure, has inside jokes and terms that have certain meanings. Like
That's right.
People gather together just start to develop a shared language of funny little things or things we don't talk about, kind of thing. So I think it is a part of gathered and organized life together. So it's not bad in that, but I think they can certainly be then delineators of who's in and who's out. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in a good way. Well, they're not part of our family, so you don't get that joke, kind of thing. But sometimes it can be an othering thing, and like you said, harmful, not in a helpful way. And I think it'd be fun, like rituals, traditions, all that kind of stuff. That's like insider things, and that's what sometimes is part of facilitating connection with people, because we have something we've shared. We've been through this. We've got this. Remember that time or whatever. Or that term means, you can, Dave and I, my husband and I, there's so many words that we can just say and look at each other, and we just have this deep meaning, either bonding us relationship or funny or kind of thing. But I think, so they're powerful again in both ways.
Yeah. You mentioned inside joke and like kind of that shared history and how someone on the outside, how that makes them feel. And I one of my favorite things in the world is I just enjoy laughing. And I think that's why I've been drawn to you as a friend, because we cut up and we just have a good time when we're chatting and hanging out. And, so I love inside jokes, and I love like moments, and it's like, when you can look across the room and not say a word,
right,
but just exchange a look.
Yes.
And you're like, what I'm thinking. I know what you're thinking. But like there's a scene in The Office, which I don't know if you're a fan of The Office.
Yes.
I'm sure many of your listeners.
I think, probably we're thinking of the same thing, but keep going.
Yeah. It's the scene where Jim and Josh, are sharing a joke, and, Michael Scott just responds, is like, ooh, inside joke. I really hope to be a part of one of those. I want to be a part of one of those one day. I mean, it just was like,
right.
Oh, just heart-wrenching, because if you're a fan of the show, Michael Scott's greatest desire is just to be accepted.
Yeah.
He just wants to be a part of something that's bigger than himself. That's why he tries to make his workplace his family. Hard.
That's why he's so cringy. Right.
Yes. He just wants, and again, it just, that comment, and it's funny when so we'll onboard new team members in Forge. And we'll say something. It's like, oh yeah, you remember when Hugh was the national director and we talked about this and that was an initiative that we were thinking through. And then we look and then there's like, 5 new team members and they're like
blank. Yeah.
And some of them are like, Hugh Halter was the national director of Forge America at one point. I'm like, oh yeah, we have different shared histories, right? And it reminds me, it's like, okay, we have to be intentional. And that's the thing I think, even for Forge, we talk about language and license. It's giving people a language and giving them license to go do the things that God wants them to do. So we do put a big emphasis on creating shared language. But part of that work, in any cultural anthropological work, you have to be committed to doing the work of helping people, everybody get the language. And so that's where you have to do the painstaking work of helping people. Oh yeah. Well, you probably heard us say this. This is what we mean. And really it's slowing down and making sure that, hey, is everyone following?
Yep.
And I think we live in a world where there are some personalities who, I have a dear friend who, when we're in a moment, she has no problem saying, oh, you guys keep saying that. What does that mean? I have no idea.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. You're new to the team. And we explain it.
Yep.
And I'm super grateful for leaders that are like that.
Yeah.
But for every one of those leaders, there's probably 4 leaders who will just sit there and not say anything.
Yeah.
And they'll play the game in their head. They're like, okay, they said that. What did, and they're trying to discern what that means. And they may or may not get to the end point that we have. And for some things, it may be a little trivial. It may not be a big deal.
Yep.
But for other things, it could be really significant things that the longer we go on presumed understanding that when we're speaking, we know we're on the same page, that, 2% here.
Yep.
Down the road can be really, really 2% can be really, really far apart. And so that's part of just being mindful. If you're going to, if you're going to be intentional about building a language for your church or community, whatever, you have to make sure that you're giving people the space to wrestle with it, embrace it, understand it. And you're not just taking it for granted. Because I do think that's one of the things we take for granted all the time is our language.
Yeah.
I say this, you know what I mean. I shouldn't have to explain myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think it's a bad thing to necessarily, just the fact of it, I think can be a natural thing, but what we do with it, and so like you and I both been to probably gatherings or conferences where you feel like I'm at somebody else's family reunion.
Yeah.
100%. And it's like, okay, that's fine. That's their thing. That's not my people. But there's other times where I feel like intentionally, or, like it's used as a bludgeon or a divider intentionally, not unintentionally, but just being aware of it, I think, and continuing to just really examining our language and knowing the power of it, I think is the biggest piece for that. Yeah.
I think that's helpful.
I think we could talk. I'm looking at the clock. I'm going, see, now like we need to meet in Chicago again and
that's right.
Go for Chicago dogs or something. Yeah. You are the co-host of the Forge America podcast, and of which I am an honored 4-time, almost 5-time guest. So by going to Forge America website, they can link to all that stuff, right? And some of the stuff you're doing. Are there other things you're working on or places people can find you, follow you, see what you're thinking about and working on?
Yeah. I mean, Forge America, that's kind of my, that has my heart. Yeah, that has my heart. That's when I wake up, that's the work that comes to mind that we're doing. And so forgeamerica.com, social media, reach out. Terry Ishee, Terry always with a Y, never with an I. You can find me. I mean, I do a lot of other things. I'm really kind of moved into a season of life where, Forge America is my primary thing, but I'm doing some things with Sequoias and coaching, organizational leadership, and all of those sorts of things. But yeah, helping people, cultivating missional practitioners is really the thing that I wake up every morning excited to get to do.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much for being my first guest, my first recording. This has been super fun.
This is amazing. I'm so excited for this podcast. I think it's going to be a blessing to the tribe, to the church. And
that's awesome.
I just from this conversation, I can't imagine what conversations you have kind of, in between your ears that you've got for the future. So it's going to be fun.
Some fun ones coming up for sure. Yeah. Thanks, Terry.
You bet.
Good to see you. Hey, friend. Thanks for joining me today. If you like this episode, I'd encourage you to share it with a friend or a fellow ministry leader. And if you enjoy the Big C Church podcast, I'd be grateful if you would go to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a positive review. Thanks so much for listening.